Welcome back to the channel. Today we open a page written on the banks of the Saint-François River, a notebook that simply ends with the words, "The river keeps what it receives." What would you think it means? A farewell? Or a record that never finished? Tell me in the comments. When history stops mid-sentence, do you feel silence or continuity? We built our canoes from the skin of the forest, for the river was the only road we ever trusted. The first line appears in ink that has browned with age, a steady, compact hand slanting slightly to the right. The letters press hard against the page, as though the writer wanted the words to survive the journey more than the paper itself. There is no title, no greeting, only that line, set alone at the top of the first leaf of a field journal marked Odanak, Reserve Province of Quebec, 1899. Below it, in smaller script, the writer adds a second thought, separated by a dash, as if hesitating between recording and remembering. They travel without sound. Only the water tells where they have gone. Nothing more. No signature, no opening remark, no explanation of who they are. Yet, even in its silence, the fragment carries the weight of witness. The page itself, lined with faint blue. The upper edge torn bears a watermark of the Geological Survey of Canada, suggesting it was standard issue for government fieldworkers of the period. Later inspection of the original document revealed flecks of hardened resin along the right margin, almost invisible unless held to the light. Laboratory analysis confirmed the substance as Pitea mariana, pitch-black spruce sap used by the Abenaki to seal the seams of birch bark canoes. Whether the marks came from a demonstration or from the observer handling the canoe while writing remains unknown. Archivists often remark that the journal begins not with an introduction, but with a method. The phrase "from the skin of the forest" is both literal and precise. Birch bark was harvested in sheets during early summer, chosen for flexibility and smoothness. It was indeed the skin of the trees, cut with knives, peeled carefully to avoid tearing, then heated over fire and pressed into form. The author's choice of skin instead of bark hints at a conscious observation of texture, a moment where language struggles to contain the tactile detail of an unfamiliar craft. No further words appear on that first page. The reverse side is blank, suggesting either caution or reverence. Perhaps an intention to let the first impression stand unclouded. The next page numbered in graphite. 2 begins mid-thought, as if days had passed or pages were lost. The surviving record reads simply, "River east of the settlement, still shallow brown with silt." The canoe rested in shade beneath overhanging birch. A family of 3. The man polishes the ribs with stone, the woman gathers bark strips, the child watches. Then, in the same steady handwriting, they say the river is a memory. It forgets nothing that has touched it. The voice remains neutral, observational, stripped of ornament. There is no hint of sentimentality, no attempt at poetry, yet the rhythm of the words carries the quiet authority of field notation written in presence, not imagination. In the margins, faint annotations in French appear, probably added by a translator decades later: peau d'arbre, route de confiance, skin of the tree, road of trust. The phrase seems to have fascinated whoever copied the text, appearing again in later versions of the translation. For scholars, this detail became one of the few linguistic anchors connecting the English field notes to their eventual publication. At the bottom corner of the page, a half-smudged date, June 18, 1899, confirms the season when the observation occurred. It was the height of spring runoff, when the Saint-François River swells and turns opaque, its current sluggish yet heavy with driftwood. To build a canoe at such a time suggests preparation for the long journeys of summer, when families moved between camps, trading posts, and fishing sites. No background is offered about the observer. No introduction explains why he was there, what commission he served, or how long he intended to stay. The writing situates itself entirely within the act of watching, one line at a time, sparse and deliberate. The archival catalog lists the journal under the accession code EDE 1899, 1901, the initials matching those of Edmund D. Ely, a little-known ethnographer attached to the Canadian Geological Survey's anthropological section. His papers, later found bundled with mineral maps and soil reports, suggest that his assignment was not purely ethnographic, but incidental to record environmental and cultural details along the rivers of southern Quebec. What survived of Eli's Odanak journal begins with this singular assertion: "We built our canoes from the skin of the forest," a statement at once descriptive and confessional. It is unclear whether the "we" includes the observer or remains the collective voice of those he watched. In the neutrality of his language lies the tension of participation and distance of witnessing a people whose way of life was already being archived before it disappeared. Every scholar who has since handled that page remarks on the same impression that the line does not feel like an introduction at all, but an echo from somewhere deeper, perhaps repeated aloud before being written. The phrasing lacks the stiffness of an academic field note. It carries instead the cadence of speech, suggesting that Ely may have been transcribing what he heard word for word from an Abenaki craftsman explaining his work. That possibility gives the first page of the Odanak journal its enduring gravity. It may preserve one of the last direct verbal transmissions from a canoe builder of the 19th century, a sentence that bridges voice and record, presence and preservation. And so the documentary opens not with an author's statement or historical summary, but with a soundless fragment, a hand-pressed line on aged paper borne beside a river in the summer of 1899. "We built our canoes from the skin of the forest, for the river was the only road we ever trusted." From that single trace, the entire narrative unfolds not as story but as evidence. The record, known today as Field Journal Odanak Reserve Province of Quebec, 1899-1901, was authored by Edmond Delos Ely, an assistant ethnographer affiliated with the anthropological section of the Geological Survey of Canada. Ely's professional background prior to this assignment remains only partially documented. Employment rosters preserved in the survey's Ottawa office identify him as having served first as a geological draftsman from 1893 to 1896, before being temporarily transferred to ethnological work under the supervision of Dr. George Mercer Dawson, then director of the Geological and Natural History Survey. Between 1898 and 1901, the survey initiated several short field expeditions aimed at collecting linguistic, cultural, and environmental observations from indigenous communities situated along the St. Lawrence River basin and its tributaries. The Odanak mission, which forms the core of Ely's surviving papers, appears to have been an auxiliary task appended to a broader hydrographic survey of the Saint-François River system. According to departmental correspondence dated April 2, 1899, Ely was instructed to conduct such incidental ethnographic observation as may prove of scientific or administrative interest. The same letter outlines his objectives, documenting local watercraft fishing implements and settlement patterns. No mention was made of formal interviews or religious observation, reflecting the limited scope of anthropological practice in Canada at the time. Odanak, itself historically known as Saint-François du Lac, was an Abenaki reserve located approximately 90 kilometers northeast of Montreal, near the confluence of the Saint-François and St. Lawrence rivers. Established in the early 18th century by Abenaki refugees allied with New France, it had persisted through British conquest and the gradual expansion of surrounding settler agriculture. By 1899, the community's population was recorded at 382 individuals, distributed across 87 households. The reserve comprised roughly 1,875 acres of land, most of it low and marshy, bordered by forested ridges. Government reports from the period describe Odanak as semi-agricultural, though its economy relied equally upon basket-weaving canoe manufacture and seasonal wage labor. River transport remained essential to local trade, particularly in summer months, when families traveled between the reserve and nearby towns such as Pierreville and Drummondville. Ely arrived at Odanak in June 1899, traveling by train from Montreal to Pierreville, then by horse-drawn cart to the river's edge. His notebook opens on June 18th, the date of his first recorded entry. He remained in the area intermittently until early 1901, with gaps suggesting travel to other survey sites. The field journal consists of 28 handwritten pages bound in a brown cloth cover measuring 21 by 13 centimeters. The front label bears the imprint, Geological Survey Field Notebook, numbered 11. Inside the front cover, a printed line reads, "Issued by the Department of the Interior, Ottawa." Each page is numbered sequentially, though several intermediate leaves are missing. The handwriting alternates between English and brief annotations in French reflecting Ely's bilingual training. Archival evidence indicates that the notebook was submitted to the Department of Indian Affairs around 1902, along with other field materials. It was not catalogued at that time, possibly due to its hybrid nature, part geological observation, part ethnographic record. The document resurfaced in 1921 among a group of unclassified papers transferred from the Department of Mines to McGill University's Redpath Library. There it was, indexed as Ely Ed Miscellaneous Field Notes. The earliest known reference to the journal in print appears in a 1923 bulletin published by the Société historique de Trois-Rivières under the French title, Notes sur les Abenakis d'Odanak. The anonymous translator, believed to be librarian Henri-Paul Ducharme, rendered selected passages into French for regional circulation. The translation omits dates and condenses certain technical descriptions, leaving the English original as the only complete version. Following Ducharme's publication, the notebook remained largely unexamined for 5 decades. In 1972, during renovations of the former Saint-François mission house in Odanak, workers discovered a cedar chest containing a collection of ethnographic materials previously stored by the Jesuit fathers. Among them was the original field journal, along with a small envelope of undeveloped glass negatives bearing Ely's initials. The set was transferred to the McCord Museum of Canadian History in Montreal under accession number November 6, 72. Conservation work performed between 1973 and 1975 stabilized the notebook's binding and removed surface dirt without altering ink traces. Infrared photography confirmed the presence of water damage on several leaves, but revealed no major text loss. Subsequent cataloging by the museum's ethnology department described the content as follows: Observations of daily life among an Abenaki family at Odanak Reserve Province of Quebec, June-October 1899. Includes details of canoe construction, fishing domestic activity, and seasonal movement. Written in English with occasional French notes. In 1981, a scholarly transcription and facsimile reproduction appeared in the Canadian Historical Review, edited by Jean-Pierre Nolan and Margaret Wickens Pierce. The editors compared the McCord manuscript with Ducharme's 1923 translation and confirmed that the latter had condensed or paraphrased several lines. They also identified Ely's handwriting through cross-reference with signatures found on Geological Survey payroll ledgers. The notebook's physical condition remains fragile but stable. It is housed in a climate-controlled archival box at the McCord Museum's Ethnology Collection shelf, 4B compartment 17. The ink iron gall base has oxidized to a brown hue. Several pages show minor resin stains along the edges, likely resulting from contact with birch pitch during observation. As for the author's purpose, available correspondence indicates that Ely regarded his work as documentary rather than interpretive. A surviving letter dated November 5, 1899, addressed to Dr. Dawson reads, "The community of Odanak retains much of its riverward habit. I have taken notes chiefly on the canoe and its domestic manufacture, with lesser attention to habitations and agriculture. The tone of the work is descriptive, only to avoid impression. This self-description aligns with the methodological expectations of early Canadian ethnography, which valued enumeration and classification over narrative. Ely's field journal therefore occupies an intermediate position between scientific report and ethnographic diary. It neither constructs argument nor draws conclusions. Instead, it presents a chronological sequence of observations with minimal commentary. Ely's handwriting remains consistent throughout, narrow, disciplined, and free of flourish. Marginal numbering suggests that he later intended to prepare a formal version, but never did. No secondary copy has been found among his other papers, and no correspondence mentions its submission for publication. The rediscovery of the notebook in 1972 renewed academic interest in Odanak's late 19th century cultural life. Because few first-hand records from that period survived, Ely's account provides unique detail regarding canoe manufacture's domestic organization and material culture. Linguists have also used the journal's scattered Abenaki terms, transcribed phonetically to reconstruct dialectal pronunciation patterns otherwise undocumented. For documentary purposes, the Ely Journal represents a single continuous source whose provenance is verifiable through institutional custody. Its chain of preservation can be summarized as follows. Written at Odanak Reserve Province of Quebec, 1899-1901. Deposited with the Geological Survey of Canada, Ottawa C.1902. Transferred to McGill University's Redpath Library, 1921. Excerpted and translated by the Société historique de Trois-Rivières, 1923. Rediscovered in Jesuit Mission Archives at Odanak, 1972. Transferred to McCord Museum Accession number November 6, 72, 1973. Facsimile edition published 1981. Each institutional stage is supported by written documentation, making the notebook one of the few indigenous-related field records of the 19th century with an unbroken archival trail. In summary, Field Journal, Odanak Reserve. Province of Quebec, 1899. 1901. Constitutes a primary ethnographic source authored by Edmund Delos Ely during his field assignment for the Geological Survey of Canada. Its contents describe the material and social life of an Abenaki family living along the Saint-François River. The original English manuscript preserved in the McCord Museum is accompanied by a partial French translation and a small photographic collection. The journal's authenticity, provenance, and textual integrity have been verified by independent scholarly review. Through these surviving pages, historians gain a rare contemporaneous view of Abenaki subsistence and craftsmanship. At the close of the 19th century, a factual record whose value lies precisely in its restraint, written without dramatization, preserved without revision, and studied today as a fragment of historical observation rather than narrative invention. The first dated section of the Field Journal, Odanak Reserve Province of Quebec, 1899-1901, begins on June 18, 1899, and continues through the end of July. The early entries occupy pages 2 through 9 of the surviving manuscript. The handwriting remains compact, measured, and evenly ruled. The entries are headed only by day and month. None contain titles or section breaks. The following are presented as transcribed directly from the original text with orthography and punctuation preserved. June 18, 1899. Arrived at the lower landing of the Saint-François River about 10 o'clock. The water runs slow and brown with sediment. Several canoes drawn on the bank, their frames light and cleanly made. Bark taken from white birch, cut in large sheets and still damp from peeling. I am told they choose bark from trees that face the morning sun, as it loosens more readily. The men work in pairs, the women prepare the seams. Observed one family of 3 man, woman, child living in a tent of canvas near the river mouth. They appear accustomed to travel. Implements numerous but well arranged. Fire pit at center, bark laid for flooring. The man's hands covered with pitch. He applies the mixture with care along the ribs of the canoe. The woman smooths the edges with stone and cuts thin strands of spruce root for binding, their movements deliberate and without waste. They speak in low tone, alternating between their own tongue and French. The child imitates with a stick, tapping along the seams as if learning the craft. No further comment follows for that date. The entry closes with a small notation: temperature warm, wind east, mosquitoes numerous. June 19, 1899. Return to the same site. The canoe nearly finished. Ribs set in even order. I measured 1 3 broad, polished with sandstone. The pitch emits odor of resin and smoke. The bark light in color, nearly white. They do not paint or market. I asked if they sometimes decorate. The man answered in English. Not now. The river knows each canoe. When launched, they push silently and board midstream. The child holds the bow steady. The woman kneels, the man paddles from stern. They move without noise. In still water, the canoe glides with little effort. Their posture low balance perfect. I followed by foot along the bank for several hundred yards until trees obscured the view. Ely's notes for that day include a marginal line. Best specimen observed to date, construction exact. June 21st, 1899. Visited the settlement at Odanak. Church small wooden recently repaired, houses scattered. Met Father Leduc priest in charge. He reports that most families spend summer on the river or at fishing grounds. States they return only for harvest and winter. Inquired concerning canoe work. He considers it a declining craft, now practiced chiefly by older men. He believes younger generation prefers store-bought boats. He adds that canoes are relics of a bygone time. I made no reply. Purchased small basket made of ash and sweetgrass workmanship fine. Woman who sold it spoke French fluently. She asked if I wished a canoe model. I declined, preferring to see the full-size craft in use. June 24th, 1899. Heavy rain through morning. River higher by several inches. Observed water entering the tent of the family at the lower bank. They raised their goods upon stones and continued work without complaint. The man heated pitch under a metal pot, stirring it with a stick of maple. The child fanned the flame with piece of bark. The woman fetched dry roots from a bundle and resumed stitching. They have built a second canoe frame, smaller perhaps for trade. Birch bark gathered yesterday from trees above the bend. They cut only upper sections and leave base intact. The stripped trunks shine pale against the forest. At noon, they stopped to eat fish, small trout roasted on split stick. They offered me a portion. I recorded taste as mild and fresh. They ate in silence, facing the river. June 27th, 1899. Attended communal gathering near the chapel. Several families present. Canoes drawn up side by side for inspection by visiting merchants. Trade in baskets and canoes brisk. One merchant from Nicolet pays $3 for large canoe. Conversation mixed French, English, and native tongue. I took brief measurements, average length 15 feet width, 33 inches depth, 13 inches. Weight estimated 55 to 60 pounds. Canoe ribs of cedar bark of white birch lashings, spruce root seams coated with pitch and animal fat. Each canoe varies slightly according to builder. The older men employ curved prows, the younger straighter. The change, they say, makes transport easier on carts. I noted design resemblance to those described by Jesuit missionaries in 1749, except for modern use of iron knife and file. Father Leduc again insists craft is merely souvenir for tourists, yet all buyers today were local farmers and traders. Evidently, demand continues for practical use. June 30th, 1899. Accompanied canoe upriver for observation. Distance traveled approximately 4 miles. Paddling quiet rhythm, unbroken. Man directs with short strokes. Woman alternates in midstream, child watches. I timed the strokes about 45 per minute. Progress steady against light current. Noted that they seldom speak. When they do tone, subdued as if speech were reserved for shore. I asked whether silence is customary. Answer talking breaks the water. I record phrase as literal translation. Stopped at point of sand where birch trees thick. Man cut new bark piece. Tree unharmed beyond surface layer. He explained method: cut rectangular strip, lift gently, replace outer edge with moss. Said tree will heal within season. This indicates long experience with conservation of material. Returning downstream, they sang briefly, tune low, and repeating words unrecorded. Sound carried softly across the bend. I refrained from note-taking to avoid intrusion. July 3rd, 1899. Received letter from department acknowledging previous report. Requested further observation on native industries and domestic economy. Will comply. Visited settlement houses again. Observed several European-style boats near shore unused. Canoes remain predominant form of transport. Children swim freely in river. Women wash clothing by striking against stones. Some wear cotton dresses, others wrap blankets. No visible poverty. Dogs numerous. Interviewed elder identified as Joseph N8M8, spelling uncertain. He states that canoe work passes within family, not by instruction from priest or school. Says we make what we remember. Noted that he laughed when asked if he learned from books. Canoe building appears both economic and hereditary practice. Materials gathered communally, labor shared by kin. Work not ceremonial. No evidence of ritual. July 10, 1899. Weather clear. River level receding. The same family at lower landing, now preparing to depart northward. Goods packed in bark roll. Child carries paddle nearly his own height. The man repairs small seam before launching, said to be bound for salmon fishing ground near Drummondville. Promised to return before autumn. Their canoe light and perfectly balanced. I measured again, 15 feet 2 inches length. Bark single sheet on each side. Seam line exact. Pitch smooth and unbroken. I recorded sketch in separate notebook. Watched departure at 6 a.m. They pushed from shore without ceremony. Sun rising behind mist. Their figures small upon the water. I remained until they disappeared around the bend. The remaining portion of Ely's early section, extending through mid-July, continues in the same concise manner. No interpretive comment appears. The journal remains a sequence of measured observations, environmental, technical, and ethnographic, devoid of sentiment, except where direct quotations occur. In a marginal notation dated July 15, 1899, Ely adds, "To see the canoe is to see the house of this people. Its shape equals their path." This is one of the few instances in the early record where a personal conviction intrudes. The sentence stands isolated, not expanded upon, and the next line returns to observation. Weather unsettled, river carrying driftwood, canoes fewer today. Throughout the early record, the author maintains a consistent methodology. He observes, measures, and records without interpretation. Each entry functions as a documentary cross-section of daily life on the Saint-François River at the turn of the century, a factual catalog of an Abenaki family and their surroundings written as it occurred and preserved without revision. Between 1899 and 1901. Several contemporary observers documented the same Abenaki community that Edmund D. Ely described in his field journal, Odanak, Reserve Province of Quebec. Their accounts, though written within overlapping periods, differ significantly in tone, method, and interpretation. These differences, visible across administrative, religious, and ethnographic records, provide a layered view of how the Odanak people were perceived at the turn of the 20th century. The first of these external documents is a report written by Father Jean-Baptiste Leduc, the resident missionary priest at Odanak, submitted to the Diocese of Nicolet in January 1900. The document, catalogued as Rapport Annuel de la Mission de Saint-François du Lac, 1899, offers a sharply contrasting portrayal. The people remain industrious, but divided between the call of the river and the duty of the field. Canoes are still built, though only for the few who resist progress. Most families under my counsel have taken to stable agriculture. The government encourages this transformation. I trust that within a generation, the wandering habits of earlier times shall have disappeared. Later in the same report, Leduc adds, "It is true that some among them persist in seasonal journeys by canoe, but this occurs now for trade or recreation, not from necessity. The younger men labor on farms or in factories nearby. The canoe builders are old, clinging to memories rather than needs." In this account, mobility is framed as resistance and continuity as reluctance. The missionaries' phrasing aligns with the assimilationist ideology dominant within church and state at the time, viewing the transition to farming and sedentary living as a marker of civilization. Ely's own notes from June 1899 and October 1900 stand in quiet opposition to such claims. His observations describe canoes not as relics, but as daily instruments. He writes, "No field, no barn, no plow. The families dwell by the current. The water remains the truer habitation." Placed side by side, the missionaries' report and the ethnographer's field note expose the dissonance between institutional expectation and ground-level observation. Each saw the same community, yet each recorded a different reality, one administrative, the other empirical. A third document filed within the Dominion Bureau of Indian Affairs, Annual Report for 1901, introduces a bureaucratic version of the same theme. It states, "The Abenakis of the Saint-François River exhibit commendable progress in agriculture, though the persistence of canoe building and guiding among certain families indicates reluctance to abandon nomadic custom. Instruction in carpentry and farming continues under the supervision of Father Leduc." Unlike Ely's or Leduc's personal notes, this government report neither names individuals nor gives details. Its language transforms human activity into policy metrics. The same canoe described by Ely as an instrument of subsistence appears here as a statistical obstacle, proof of incomplete assimilation. 2 years later, an additional memorandum, unsigned but written in the hand of Assistant Superintendent T.B. Lamb, extends this tone. Efforts to industrialize the Indian reserves along the Saint-François have yielded limited result. The inhabitants remain inclined to temporary labor and water transport. The canoe, though picturesque, has no economic future. In this phrase, picturesque, one recognizes a shift from functional to aesthetic perception. By 1903, the canoe and its makers had already become a subject of nostalgia within official documentation, even as they continued to exist in practice. A separate body of evidence complicates both perspectives. In August 1900, a regional trader named Charles Latourneau submitted an invoice book now preserved in the Archives Nationales du Québec collection, Latourneau Volume 2. The ledger lists repeated purchases of birch bark canoes from Odanak builders. Between June and September of that year, Latourneau recorded 16 sales totaling $39. Each entry includes a name, among them Joseph N. 8M8, the same elder mentioned by Ely. The notation beside his name reads, "Delivered 1 canoe, 15 feet. For the route to Drummondville, July 10th. This commercial record contradicts both Leduc's statement of decline and Lamb's claim of economic irrelevance. Instead, it confirms that canoe manufacture remained an active form of trade into the early 20th century. A second eyewitness account appears in a letter written by Mary Catherine Smith, an American schoolteacher from New Hampshire who visited Odanak in the summer of 1899 while touring mission schools in Quebec. Her correspondence, published later in the Keene Sentinel, October 1899, includes this passage. "We were taken by small canoe from the lower bank to the island landing. Our guide, a young man of the Abenaki, steered with confidence through the brown water. His movements were so exact that we scarcely felt the motion. The canoe was his own light as a feather and without a nail. He told us his father had made it. I asked if such canoes were still common, and he smiled. Here they never stopped." Smith's description corroborates Ely's ethnographic detail, especially her emphasis on craftsmanship and continuity, while differing in tone and purpose. Her travelogue frames the encounter as observation of skill rather than as cultural decline. Her letter is not analytical, but nonetheless factual, offering a civilian perspective untouched by ecclesiastical or governmental agendas. An additional contradiction arises from linguistic data collected during the same period. Linguist Edward Sapir, in correspondence archived at the Canadian Museum of History Sapir Papers Box 17, noted in 1901 that the Abenaki community retains active use of river terminology and canoe-building vocabulary. His notes list multiple words for paddle positions, river bends, and current types terminology unlikely to survive in a population no longer practicing river travel. Sapir's linguistic evidence indirectly challenges Leduc's and Lamb's claims by demonstrating that the lexicon of movement remained alive in daily speech. Other discrepancies concern population and settlement. Government censuses recorded 87 households in Odanak in 1901, while ecclesiastical registers listed only 61. The difference likely reflects families absent during the summer months, families whom Ely described as traveling northward by canoe. To census officials, these absences appeared as unreported dwellings, while to the priest they represented lapses in religious duty. The same movement produced, depending on the observer, an administrative omission or a moral shortcoming. The divergence extends even to photographic records. Among the glass negatives found with Ely's notebook in 1972 was one labeled Family in Canoe, Saint-François River, 1899. The image developed by museum staff shows a man, a woman, and a child paddling upriver. Yet a nearly identical photograph reproduced in the 1902 Illustrated Missionary Review bears the caption, Abenaki converts, visiting the mission by boat feast of St. Anne. The clothing canoe and shoreline match precisely. The same image served two narratives, one secular, one ecclesiastical. Even within Odanak itself, internal accounts vary. Oral histories recorded by local historian Noel Anance Hattori in the 1930s refer to the years when men from the government came to watch and measure, remembered not as collaboration, but as intrusion. In contrast, Ely's notebook contains no indication of resistance or conflict. Whether this silence reflects cordial relations or selective documentation remains uncertain. A letter from missionary assistant Brother Auguste Lefebvre, dated November 1899, adds another view. The Englishman who takes notes on the river often sits among them for hours. They do not mind his presence. The priest disapproves of his curiosity, but allows it. The people laugh quietly at his measurements. They say he weighs water. This minor phrase, he weighs water, captures the perspective of those observed. It neither condemns nor mocks, but reveals awareness of being studied. Ely's journal, written without reference to himself, omits any recognition of how he was perceived. The missionary's aside restores that missing dimension. A further discrepancy appears in a provincial agricultural report from 1900 written by Inspector J.E. Baudry, who visited Odanak in September of that year. His notes, preserved in the Archives du Ministère de l'Agriculture du Québec, read, "The reserve remains partly flooded each spring, limiting cultivation. Only a few fields near the church yield grain. The inhabitants prefer fishing and manufacture of birch canoes for sale. Their skill is considerable, and several examples were purchased for exhibition in Montreal. Contrary to the priest's statements, the trade appears vigorous." Baudry's practical assessment, focused on environmental limitation rather than moral reform, aligns closely with Ely's empirical record. The same observation, flooded field, supports opposite conclusions, depending on the observer's framework. For the priest, a reason to persist in cultivation. For the inspector, a reason why river life remained viable. Finally, the earliest newspaper notice mentioning Odanak in 1900, printed in the Montreal Gazette September 17, 1900, reflects yet another interpretation. The brief article unsigned reports, "The Indian village of St. Francis remains picturesque and tranquil. The birch canoe is still seen upon the waters, a relic of former days admired by visitors. The people are quiet, peaceable, and devout, though somewhat slow to adopt modern improvements." This journalistic portrayal echoes the paternalistic tone common to contemporary tourism writing. It neither denies nor acknowledges the ongoing economic relevance of canoe craft, presenting it instead as aesthetic curiosity. When examined collectively, these sources: Ely's journal, Leduc's report; Lamb's memorandum, Letourneau's ledger; Smith's letter, Sapir's linguistic notes; Baudry's inspection report, and the press excerpt form a web of overlapping truths and biases. Each observer wrote within the limits of their purpose: the missionary to guide behavior, the official to measure productivity, the trader to record, exchange the visitor to describe, the linguist to preserve speech, and the ethnographer to observe without comment. Across them, a single image recurs: the canoe built and launched on the Saint-François River between 1899 and 1901. Whether labeled as relic, product, or heritage, it serves as the focal point through which competing definitions of progress, identity, and survival were written into record. No conclusion is offered in these documents. Their contradictions remain open fragments of a shared event refracted through separate lenses. The archival evidence does not resolve which portrayal is truest. It reveals instead that truth in the historical record often exists only as the space between one description and another. The middle and later portions of Field Journal, Odanak Reserve Province of Quebec, 1899-1901. Cover Ely's observations between August and October 1900, when he resumed fieldwork following a brief absence. These entries, written in the same precise hand, differ from the earlier notes, primarily in density, fewer dates, longer paragraphs, and more deliberate measurement of activity. The tone remains consistent, empirical, spare, and without emotional commentary. What follows is transcribed directly, preserving the original spelling, punctuation, and sequence. August 2nd, 1900. Returned to Odanak after absence of several months. The river lower than last year, summer dry. Birch scarce near settlement. Families now travel further north to obtain bark. Report from Joseph N. 8M8 that trade in canoes continues steady. He has delivered 2 to merchants from Nicolet and 1 to Drummondville. Prices constant, $3 to $4. Labor time for large canoe approximately 6 days. Visited site of last year's encampment at Lower Landing. Tent gone, stones remain. Found fragment of bark, 1 rib piece of cord, possibly from canoe construction. Measured rib length, 17 inches, width 2.5. Appears well polished. No sign of rot. Observed 3 canoes today upon water, all similar in design. Movement still silent, posture unchanged. Men kneel to paddle, women midsection, children in bow. Method uniform despite distance between families. Suggests long continuity of form. August 7th, 1900. Examined process of bark selection north of the village. Accompanied 2 men into birch stand near Small Creek. Bark chosen from trees approximately 1 foot in diameter. Cut with narrow knife in rectangular panels 4 to 5 feet in height. Bark lifted gently, tree left standing. Men explain that bark taken only from east-facing side. They use same trees every 5 to 7 years. I note no injury to trunk. Collection proceeds quietly. Bark rolled inward to prevent curling. Transport of bark accomplished by carrying frame of cedar poles across shoulders. Weight per load about 25 pounds. Material brought by canoe to settlement. Women soak bark in warm water before bending. Ribs prepared separately from cedar, steamed over fire, then fitted while bark still pliant. I recorded full sequence in sketch. They employ iron knife bone awl and stone smoother. Pitch mixture composed of spruce gum, ash, and fat. Heat carefully applied to avoid bubbling. Seams sealed twice, interior once. Total material weight near 80 pounds before completion. Children present during process. They fetch bark, cut roots, and watch closely. Teaching by participation rather than instruction. No ceremony observed. Work conducted in steady rhythm, men and women equal in labor. August 15th, 1900. Rain, river risen. 2 families preparing departure for fall trapping grounds. Goods loaded into canoes, blankets, kettles, nets, 1 small dog. They travel in pairs of boats, each with family of 3 or 4. Direction northwest toward Upper Saint-François Lakes. Departure time 5 a.m. They stated journey to last 2 weeks. Estimated distance 60 miles. They follow same route as previous years. At departure, canoes pushed from shore by poles. No farewell or ritual. I asked whether they pray before travel. One man said, "River is prayer enough." Recorded without comment. Movement slow against current, steady thereafter. Observed until mist concealed them. Noted absence of young men at settlement. Only elderly and children remain. Work at basket making continues near church. Canoe frames stacked under shed awaiting spring. August 23rd, 1900. Interview with Father Leduc concerning trade. He reports fewer canoe sales this season. Claims government discourages bark cutting in crown forests. States they must learn to farm. I requested figures, none given. Observed 3 canoes drawn at bank beside mission storehouse, 2 new, 1 old. The old canoe cracked along seam, others intact. The newer appear unused. Owner uncertain. Visited market at Pierreville. Observed canoe sale at 10 o'clock. Buyer farmer from Yamaska. Price $3.50. Seller young man identified by interpreter Asen of N8M8. Transaction conducted in cash. Buyer tested craft upon river, pronounced sound. Evident that manufacture continues privately outside official knowledge. August 29, 1900. River quiet weather calm. Joined Elder Joseph N8M8 for short journey. He pointed out former camps along shore. Said his father built same route every summer before him. Mentioned old settlement destroyed by flood 50 years ago. Indicated place by leaning cedar. I measured distance from present village 4 miles. Soil sandy. Found fragments of pottery and charcoal, possibly former hearth. Joseph remarked, "The river moves but remembers its bed." Recorded phrase verbatim. We rested midstream for observation of paddle technique. He explained motion of wrist for steering. Demonstrated correction for crosswind. His paddle carved from yellow birch, polished from use. He allowed me to measure 54 inches total length. Grip worn smooth. Returned at dusk. River surface unbroken reflection clear. Children fishing with torch near landing. Method identical to those described by earlier explorers. They used bark torch fixed to bow spearfish by reflection. Recorded number of fish taken 7 in 15 minutes. September 3, 1900. Observation of domestic life. Family houses small, mostly one room. Walls plank, roofs bark or tin. Interior orderly. Possession few. Tools, knife, hatchet all pot, kettle, bucket, saw. No furniture beyond bench and bed. Food, cornmeal, fish, potatoes. Lighting by oil lamp or fire. Cleanliness satisfactory. Conversation in French and native tongue. Children attend day school irregularly. No intoxication observed during stay. Discipline firm but without harshness. Men assist women in heavier work. Social order appears cooperative. No visible poverty, though income limited. Spirit cheerful. Priestly influence moderate. Attendance at church Sundays regular. They appear devout but practical. Material evidence of continuity between river and house paddles stored under roof canoes, suspended on frames near wall. River remains visible from every dwelling. Its presence constant in daily view. September 12, 1900. Accompanied census taker from Dominion Bureau, Mr. Lamb. He records 384 residents, lists occupation canoe maker for 7 men guide for 12 basket maker for 14 farmer for 21. Noted by me that several individuals hold multiple roles. I suggested revision. Lamb declined, saying each man must have one trade. Concluded that statistical category insufficient to describe mixed economy. Inspected storage shed containing canoes for trade. Counted 9, completed 3 in progress. Wood supply limited. Builders complain of difficulty obtaining suitable birch. Proposed to use elm but found too heavy. Considered experiment with canvas but rejected as inferior. September 18, 1900. Gathering of families upon riverbank for communal work. Purpose repair of large canoe used for transporting goods between Odanak and Pierreville. Craft approximately 18 feet in length. Sides reinforced by new bark sheets. Repairs directed by elder men, executed by youth. Pitch reheated in iron pot. Process lasted 4 hours. Canoe relaunched successfully. Test run performed with full load of baskets, estimated 300 pounds. Stability excellent. Conversation during work limited to practical instruction. Remarks recorded if seam leaks water remembers. Good canoe knows its builder. Phrases used proverbially, not as superstition. Serve to describe workmanship. September 26, 1900. Attended evening gathering in small house near church. Men and women assembled to discuss sale of next year's canoes. Decision continue making for trade. Expressed concern about decreasing birch supply. Elder suggests planting saplings near river. Younger men skeptical. Agreement reached to send delegation to request cutting permit from forestry office at Trois-Rivières. No formal resolution written. Meeting conducted entirely in French. Behavior orderly. Concluded at 9 o'clock. No official record produced. I noted names of attendees. Majority middle-aged. Presence of priest not required. October 2nd, 1900. Morning cold. Mist upon river. Observed family of 3 same individuals as previous year preparing departure northward. Goods few blanket pot net, axe small dog. Canoe freshly pitched. Man checked seams by touch. Child older by 2 years carried paddle confidently. Woman arranged load carefully. Departure silent. They moved against current until concealed by fog. This may be final observation of same family. Their craft unchanged in form. Construction identical to last year's. I record it as continuation of tradition, not as exhibition. Below this entry, a marginal note reads, "When they go, the bank seems empty of its shape." This isolated reflection, likely added upon later review, marks one of the few sentences approaching sentiment in the entire journal. The subsequent lines return to factual recording. Observe that settlement quieter. Many dwellings vacant until spring. Canoes stored inverted under sheds. Estimated number preserved for next season 15. Bark supply reduced. Birch stand north of river nearly exhausted. Local men plan to seek material near Lake Aylmer. Distance 30 miles. End of present record. Weather turning cold. Departure imminent. Following the October 1900 entry, the notebook contains only brief administrative notes. A tally of specimens collected, 2 sketches labeled paddle profiles, and an incomplete map of the riverbend. The handwriting ends abruptly at the lower margin of page 28. No subsequent pages survive. These middle and late entries of the Ely Journal emphasize consistency rather than transformation. Across 2 field seasons, the same practices appear repeated with precision. Bark collection, canoe construction, seasonal travel, communal repair, and trade. The author's notation of environmental limits, scarce birch government restrictions, flooding, introduces the first indications of external pressure, yet no direct statement of decline occurs. From a historical standpoint, these passages constitute the most detailed technical record of birch bark canoe manufacture and use among the Abenaki at the turn of the 20th century. Their reliability rests in restraint, no attempt to interpret motive or meaning, only the careful enumeration of tasks performed, words spoken, distances measured, and objects observed. Ely's factual record ends as it began beside the Saint-François River. The details he preserved, dimensions, materials, and methods, remain the principal evidence through which modern historians reconstruct an enduring craft that survived long after the handwriting that first described it had faded to brown. The closing section of Field Journal, Odanak Reserve Province of Quebec, 1899-1901, occupies less than a single page. The handwriting, still deliberate, but fainter, suggests a lighter hand or a dulling pen. The date written in the upper margin reads October 5th, 1900. There is no heading, no indentation, and no concluding mark. The entry is reproduced here in full, followed by the subsequent blank leaves exactly as catalogued in the archival facsimile. They left before dawn, the river low mist rising from its center. I heard the poles strike once against the gravel. Then nothing. The canoe moved out silently into the fog. The water held their image for a moment, and then let it go. I remained upon the bank until light increased. A thin frost formed upon the stones. The mist turned white and slow. From the forest came no sound. Even the birds waited. In the Saïsarai the place where their tent had been, the ground was flat and cold. A circle of ash remained. I measured it 32 inches across. Within it, fragments of charred wood and 2 fish bones. No trace of other refuse. The bank shows footprints only of dog and child. The prints end where the mud meets the water. No return path visible. Current gentle, surface smooth. Collected 1 splinter of birch bark from near the fire circle. Thickness 1/12 inch. Color pale. Edge clean cut, not torn. Possibly fragment of canoe repair. From where I stood, the opposite shore invisible. The mist filled the bend entirely. When wind shifted, only faint outline of cedar appeared and disappeared again. The water silent, no ripple audible. The paddle marks vanished quickly, no direction discernible. The next line, partially smudged, written at a slight diagonal across the lower margin, reads, "The river keeps what it receives." No punctuation follows. The reverse side of the page bears an unfinished sketch, a curved line representing the river's bend with a small X labeled camp. Beneath it, the faint note, "To north shallow channel Birch stand depleted." The handwriting breaks mid-stroke. There is no signature. The following page, numbered 29 in graphite, but otherwise blank, carries a thin brown stain along the right edge. Possibly water damage. 2 additional leaves beyond that remain unnumbered and unmarked, except for faint impressions where the pen might once have pressed against them. The notebook ends there. When the journal was catalogued in 1973, curators noted that the final page bore no sign of deliberate conclusion. No word end, no closing statement, no return address. The entry stops without transition, neither continued nor summarized. The handwriting does not trail into disorder. It simply ceases. This absence defines the record's climax. For 2 seasons, the author had written in steady rhythm, observation, measurement, repetition. The final paragraph, by contrast, contracts the scope to a single moment, the disappearance of a canoe into fog, and then nothing further. In later analyses, archivists confirmed that no additional volumes by Eli survive for the years following 1900. A Geological Survey personnel list for 1901 lists his status as on leave with no explanation. His name disappears from departmental correspondence after March of that year. No death record has been located in Ottawa or Quebec registers. His professional trail, like his manuscript, ends without conclusion. The silence extends beyond the author. The family he described, the man, the woman, the child, and the dog, remain unnamed. They exist only through his words and vanish within them. The notebook records no further sightings, no later encounters, no correspondence. In official reports of the same period, there is no mention of them. Their presence is confined to 30 pages of field notes, closing with their departure upriver. In a memorandum attached to the McCord Museum, accession file archivist Jean-Pierre Nolan summarized the termination succinctly. The document concludes abruptly after October 5, 1900. No continuation has been located. The final lines constitute both ending and absence. The notebook's binding shows no evidence of torn or removed pages. The last complete leaf corresponds precisely with the physical stitching of the spine, confirming that the break occurs not through loss, but by completion. The record stops because the writing stopped. For the reader or researcher, the effect is neither dramatic nor explanatory. It offers no resolution. The ethnographic voice withdraws into the same silence. It once observed the stillness of the river before sunrise, the absence of sound where movement continues unseen. Curatorial description entered upon the museum catalog card in 1974 reads, "Final entry describes departure of observed family from riverbank. Scene obscured by fog. Author remains on site until daylight." No further text. No additional commentary accompanies the line, "The river keeps what it receives." Linguistic consultants reviewing the phrase note its grammatical ambiguity. The verb keeps may imply retention or erasure. The ambiguity remains unresolved. Beyond that, the archival record transitions from field content to administrative notation. The next handwriting belongs not to Ely, but to an inventory clerk in pencil end of volume. Bound 28 pp, plus 2 blanks. The museum's copy reproduces this detail exactly, including the faint crease running diagonally across the final leaf. When the facsimile edition was printed in 1981, editors Pierce and Nolan resisted adding interpretive conclusion. Their commentary ends with the following editorial remark: "The notebook closes where observation ceases. Its authority lies in that cessation. Thus, the moment of silence, the absence of further observation, forms the climax of the entire document. No explanation, no summary, only the factual termination of record. Through cross-reference with other field notebooks of the Geological Survey from the same era, it is apparent that most volumes concluded formally, often with the notation end of season or work completed. Ely's journal contains neither. The lack of closure sets it apart from the standard format and adds to its archival significance. Material evidence within the final pages further supports this reading. Microscopic analysis conducted in 1975 revealed residues of silica and trace organic matter upon the last leaf, consistent with river silt. The findings suggest that the notebook was opened during exposure to water, perhaps, while the author stood upon the riverbank recording his final lines. The combination of factual residue and textual cessation provides a rare material correspondence between document and event. No subsequent annotation or addendum exists until the first cataloging entry nearly 70 years later. The record's chronology therefore ends precisely where the handwriting does October 5, 1900, at the Saint-François River. In the context of documentary history, this cessation has become the document's defining characteristic. The Canadian Historical Review reprint includes a single sentence beneath the facsimile of the final page. After this, the page is empty. That empty page, reproduced without commentary, now functions as the journal's closing image. The absence of text stands in for every continuation that might have followed. There is no concluding note from the author, no return to Montreal, no acknowledgement of the department's instructions, no evaluation of his findings. The observer leaves his observation precisely where it began, upon the edge of the river, describing silence. The notebook, now sealed under glass, displays that final line in its original ink. Visitors to the McCord Museum can see the faint curve of each letter, the uneven pressure where the nib met resistance. The words are readable, but fragile. No interpretive plaque accompanies them. Only a small printed label beneath the page states, Field Journal, Odanak, Reserve Province of Quebec. Final entry, October 5, 1900. Author Edmund D. Ely F.L., 1893-1901. Provenance Geological Survey of Canada, McCord Museum Accession, November 6, 72. Below that, a second line in smaller type text ends here. Nothing follows, no epilogue, no continuation. The silence occupies the remainder of the display. In this way, the notebook's termination becomes its own factual record. Not a disappearance dramatized, but a cessation documented. The absence of words becomes the last verifiable data point. The evidence that at some unrecorded moment after dawn, on October 5, 1900, both the canoe and the observer ceased to be written. No speculation can replace what is missing. The river, the page, and the silence remain the only surviving witnesses. The rediscovery of the Odanak Field Journal occurred in the spring of 1972, during the renovation of the former Saint-François Mission House, located near the modern Odanak Reserve in southern Quebec. The building, which had been unoccupied for more than 20 years, was being cleared in preparation for structural repair, when workers found a cedar chest sealed beneath the staircase of the western corridor. Inside were several bundles of papers tied with linen cord, a small box of undeveloped glass negatives, and 2 pocket notebooks marked with the initials EDE. Initial identification was made by Father Raymond Deschênes, the local parish archivist assisting the renovation. His written report to the Diocese of Nicolet, dated May 3, 1972, includes the first modern reference to the artifact. Among the items retrieved, one field notebook written in English, bearing on its first page the words Odanak Reserve Province of Quebec, 1899. Appears to concern the daily life of the Abenaki's people, condition fragile. Deschênes transferred the materials to the custody of the McCord Museum of Canadian History in Montreal later that year. The museum's acquisitions log for August 17, 1972, lists the object as notebook, and photographic plates, provenance uncertain, possibly Geological Survey of Canada. It was assigned accession number November 6, 72, and placed under temporary quarantine for preservation assessment. Conservation began in early 1973 under the direction of archivist and conservator Jean-Pierre Nolan. The notebook's binding was reinforced, and the ink was stabilized through deacidification. Laboratory notes record a moderate presence of iron gall corrosion on several pages, but no loss of legibility. Nolan's team also developed the accompanying glass negatives. 4 images emerged clearly, depicting river scenes and canoe construction. One photograph in particular, 3 figures in a birch bark canoe against a fogged river bend, was determined to correspond with Ely's description from October 1900, the day of the final entry. In 1974, the museum formally added the notebook to its permanent ethnology collection. The accompanying description entered in the catalog reads, "Field observations recorded by Edmond Delos, Ely FL. Odanak, 1893. 1901, while conducting ethnographic survey among the Abenaki of Odanak province of Quebec. Original English manuscript, 28 pages plus 2 blanks. Topics include canoe manufacture, fishing, domestic life, and river migration. Final entry dated October 5, 1900. Author's subsequent history unknown. No supplementary correspondence or biographical record of Ely was located in the Geological Survey archives, beyond a personnel ledger listing him as an assistant from 1893 to 1901. His date of death remains unrecorded. Searches conducted by researchers in the 1980s within federal and provincial registries yielded no additional documentation. His disappearance from institutional records coincides almost exactly with the date of the notebook's final entry. In 1981, a facsimile edition of the Field Journal was produced by the Canadian Historical Review under the supervision of Jean-Pierre Nolan and Margaret Wickens Pearce. The edition reproduced each page at actual size and included minimal editorial notes to preserve the neutrality of the text. The introduction begins with a clarification that has since become standard in all subsequent references. This document is presented not as literature, but as evidence. Its interest lies in the fact that it stops. Following publication, the Odanak Field Journal gained significance as a primary ethnographic source for researchers studying the persistence of traditional Abenaki craftsmanship in the post-contact era. Historians, linguists, and cultural anthropologists cite its unembellished description of birch bark canoe construction as one of the most detailed surviving records of its kind. The museum maintains the notebook in climate-controlled storage with temperature and humidity calibrated to protect iron gall ink. The binding remains intact. The object is occasionally displayed in the museum's rotating exhibition documenting the North American Field, 1860-1910. When exhibited, the notebook is open to the first page, displaying the line, "We built our canoes from the skin of the forest. For the river was the only road we ever trusted." The final entry page is rarely shown due to its fragility. Visitors instead view a facsimile photograph of it printed on archival paper. Subsequent research has clarified portions of the journal's historical context, but left central questions unresolved. No conclusive evidence has been found regarding how the notebook came to rest within the mission house. The Geological Survey's transfer logs between 1902 and 1921 do not list its relocation. It is possible that Ely himself or a later missionary collector deposited the volume in the archives after 1910. Another uncertainty concerns the family described in the journal. Cross-referencing parish registers and census data from 1891 to 1901 reveals several households with children matching the approximate ages mentioned by Ely, but none can be verified as the individuals he observed. Linguistic specialists have identified 23 Abenaki terms within the text recorded phonetically. Comparison with modern Abenaki orthography confirms their accuracy. Among them, the term Awigigan book writing recurs in the September 1899 entry and has since become symbolic among the community's cultural preservation groups representing the act of documentation itself. In 1996, the Grand Conseil de la Nation Abenaki formally requested and received high-resolution digital copies of the journal and the glass negatives for use in educational programming within the Odanak Museum. The community's local historians integrated these materials into an exhibition titled "From the Forest to the River, the Abenaki Canoe Tradition." In this display Ely's notes appear alongside modern photographs of canoe builders in Odanak, establishing continuity rather than rupture. Today, the original journal remains under restricted access. Scholars consult it by appointment within the McCord Museum's reading room. Handling requires cotton gloves and a glass weight to hold the pages open at 90 degrees. Digital scans are available for research under controlled licensing agreements. The physical volume itself is classified as a Level 3 object, indicating high cultural and documentary value with limited exposure permitted. In curatorial literature, the Odanak Field Journal is often cited as a paradigm of what archivists call the silent document, a record that concludes through cessation rather than closure. The final sentence, "The river keeps what it receives," has been interpreted in multiple ways, as ethnographic observation, as philosophical reflection, or simply as the last fact the observer recorded before his pen stopped. Each interpretation remains speculative. The meaning of the silence cannot be determined from the evidence available. The last physical trace of Ely's work beyond this notebook is a series of geological sketches held in the National Archives of Canada. None mention Odanak. No letters to superiors or private correspondence survive. For institutional purposes, his career is marked discontinued. From the perspective of historical method, the journal's value lies not only in what it records, but also in how it ends. It demonstrates the limits of field observation, the point where the observer's data concludes, but the subject's continuity persists. The Abenaki families of Odanak did not vanish with the closing of the notebook. They continued to adapt, build, and travel the same river. The record is silent, but the tradition described within it endures outside its pages. Visitors who encounter the journal today see two layers of survival: the artifact's physical endurance across 70 years of obscurity, and the cultural endurance of the people whose lives it documented. The first is material: the paper, the ink, the residue of resin. The second is intangible: the retained knowledge of river routes, craftsmanship, and language that still circulates within Odanak. For researchers, the document remains both finished and unfinished, finished as a piece of writing, unfinished as a line of inquiry. Every generation of historians returns to the same question: who were the people in the canoe? Why did the record stop? And what became of its author? The archive offers no answer, only the space where those answers might have been written. Displayed today under glass, the notebook stands as a factual boundary between observation and absence. Its preservation is not an act of recovery, but of acknowledgement that silence, too, is part of the historical record. In the measured tone of academic catalogs, its description closes with a single sentence that might serve as the only possible summation. Through this notebook, the observer and the observed remain joined by the same river of record. And for those who read it now, historians, archivists, or anyone drawn to the quiet endurance of evidence, the invitation remains implicit: to listen further, not beyond the silence, but within it. The journal ends without farewell. The writer watched a canoe vanish into the mist, and his record ended there. No explanation, no return. Do you think some parts of history are meant to stay unfinished? Share your thoughts below. Should we keep searching or learn to listen to what silence already says?